G'day, welcome to the podcast. Back in the olden days, there was an exercise that was simple in concept and execution, but tough and challenging. It didn't require any special equipment, and you could do it anywhere. There was nothing fancy about this exercise. It was simple and basic. This exercise was, as you've probably figured out by the title, the push-up. But the humble push-up seems to have been left on the back burner as fancier exercises have taken over. You can't stack lots of weight on a push-up like you do with a bench press. And it's not flashy and showy to be putting on social media. So in this episode, I'm talking about push-ups because I want to make push-ups great again. My name's Keith, and this is the Kilted Athlete Podcast. I've been wanting to do a podcast episode about push-ups for quite some time. And if you're a regular listener to my podcast, you would know I mentioned push-ups in quite a few episodes. I'm a big fan. I love push-ups. But I've noticed that people have stopped doing them. Push-ups seem to have been relegated to the archives, and people just I don't see people doing them much anymore. In fact, the only time I really see people doing push-ups is when they're doing a fitness test for like a police force entry test or defence force entry test or maybe as part of football training or martial arts training. I don't see people down the gym doing them. Actually, in fact, I can't actually remember the last time I saw somebody at the gym doing push-ups. But in this episode, I'm going to advocate for the push-ups. I'm going to be talking about the benefits of the push-up and actually what actually constitutes a good push-up. There's a lot of bad push-up techniques out there, and believe me, I've seen some very bad push-up techniques. So I want to talk about how to get the most out of a push-up, how to nail that technique, and what a push-up can actually do for you. Now, I'm actually sitting at a truck stop as I record this, so you might hear the odd truck in the background. I may have to pause every now and then if a particularly loud truck is going past. But yeah, if you hear a bit of noise in the background, that is what is going on. So let's crack on. Let's talk about firstly what a push-up actually is. So a push-up is primarily an upper body exercise, but it works so much more than just your chest and shoulders. It starts off in a prone plank position, a high plank position with arms fully extended and locked out, and then you lower the body into a position where your upper arms are parallel with the ground, so you're holding your chest above the ground, but you've got a 90-degree angle in your elbows, and then from that position you push yourself back up to the start position. Now, before I go any further and people start commenting, well, there's this push up and that push up, this is the standard, the basic standard push up that I'm talking about here. So as I said, this is primarily an upper body exercise that is going to work your chest, your triceps, and your shoulders. But there's so much more happening with this exercise than just an inverted bench press. Unlike a bench press where you're laying on a bench, you're in quite a supported position. You've got a big point of contact. Your whole back is supported. Unlike that, you've only got four small points of contact with the ground with a bench, with a push-up. So you've got your 2 feet and you've got 2 hands. So because of that, there's a lot of stabilization that your body needs to create to make this happen. So before you actually start the movement of the push-up, there's a lot happening. Your core is working to keep yourself in that plank position. Your your glutes are working to stop your hips from dropping. Um, your shoulders are working to keep you stable in that position. So there's a lot more happening even before you start the movement. Advantages of a push-up. The main one is it can be done almost anywhere with no equipment. So it can be done when you're on holidays in a motel room. It can be done anywhere. All you need is a floor space big enough to fit your body and gravity. So, if you're listening to this episode from a space station or from the moon, um, might be a bit more of a challenge to find somewhere to do a push-up. But for the majority of my listeners that are on Earth, they have no trouble finding gravity to do a push-up. The other big advantage is this works so many different muscles. It's not, like I said, just an inverted bench press. Yes, it is working your chest, it is working your triceps, but it's also working on shoulder stability, core strength, glute strength. Even muscles in your upper back are coming in as supporting muscles for this movement. Now let's talk about how to execute a push-up. This is simple but not easy. So the concept is simple, the execution difficult. And some of you might be out there saying, "Oh, push-ups, they're not difficult. I graduated from them years ago, and now I just bench press. I don't do push-ups anymore." But but I say to those people, when was the last time you did a push-up and did a good push-up? Um, I see a lot of people kind of like bouncing up and down on the ground doing these kind of what what they believe to be a push-up, but um, that they leave a lot to be desired. So let's talk about setting up a correct push-up. Um, so firstly, you want to start off, just lay face down on the ground, just to set yourself up. Put your hands level with your chest. Um, you just you want your hands at just slightly outside your chest. Your feet can be together. They can be like up to about 30 centimeters apart. Personal preference. And from there, you want to push yourself up into the start position, which is the high plank position. So from here, your hands need to be under your chest, like at chest level. You don't want your hands too far forward, don't want your hands too far back. Um, your core is engaged so that your midsection doesn't sag in the middle. Your glutes are engaged to stop your hip dropping. And there should be a nice straight line between the shoulder and the heel. So you don't want your bottom sticking in the air. It should be nice and flat, nice and straight. Now, if this sounds familiar, this is the high plank position. This is an exercise in itself. Um, you're essentially doing a high plank. You could do this for like a considerable period of time, and it would be good exercise. You would be working on your core, mainly strengthening that core to hold that position, to stop yourself sagging in the middle, to stop your bottom sticking in the air. and also your shoulders would be stabilizing yourself because you're in a high plank position. In a low plank position, you've got the elbows on the ground, so you're not really trying to stabilize yourself as much. So your shoulders don't come into play so much. Um, not not saying that the low plank is a bad exercise, but that's the main difference between the high and the low plank. So this is an exercise in itself, holding that position. If you cannot get into that position, you need to work at that before you even attempt to do a push-up. Because it's no point, if you can't nail this position, it's no point trying to progress into a push-up. A push-up is essentially a progression from a high plank. So I'll go through this position again, explain from head to toe. So your head, you kind of want your head in a neutral position. So you don't want to be looking too far forward, craning your neck forward, but you don't want to be looking straight down either because then your neck is like in an awkward position. So maybe look about, half a meter in front of you, just so your neck is in a neutral position. Um, Shoulders are locked in, just above your hands. So directly above your hands, you want your shoulders to be. So a nice straight line from your shoulders down to your hands. Your hands on the ground, fingers played out, about level with your chest. You don't want them too far forward. You don't want them too far back. Your hands are also just past shoulder width apart. Once again, I'm talking about the standard push-up here. I know there are other variations when you have your hands, close together in diamond push-ups and all that kind of thing. But the standard push-up, feet are, uh, hands are just past shoulder width apart. Elbows locked out, so your arm is straight, and going down your back, you've got a nice straight line between your shoulder and your heel. So if you look at your upper back, you're not kind of sagging in the middle here. You want kind of a nice flat line between your shoulder blades. Your core is engaged, so your belly isn't sagging down in the middle. Your glutes are engaged, so your hips aren't sagging in the middle. Your bum is not sticking in the air, and your legs are straight, so no like knee bend in the middle. You're on your toes, and that is the high plank or the push-up up position. And once again, if you can't achieve this position, you're not going to be able to do a push-up. So you, if this position is, if you're saying, if your bum's sticking in there, if you haven't nailed this position, work on nailing this position before you work on the push-up. Otherwise, your push-up's going to look horrible. So when I see people attempting push-ups that um, can't do a strict push-up, um, one or two things these are going wrong. And the first thing is this whole position. And then, if they can't hold this position, then they're trying to bend their elbows and their groins kind of like pushing towards the ground. And it doesn't resemble a push-up at all. The second thing that usually goes wrong is the movement itself, but I'll talk about that shortly. So once you've nailed the up position of the push up, then the movement begins. So what you want to do is lower your chest to the ground by bending your elbows until they are at 90-degree angles or parallel with the ground. So you want to get your upper arms parallel with the ground. So there's a nice kind of flat surface bit like going from elbow to elbow all the way across your back. So You kind of don't want any rounding in your back. If you look at the elbow you should be able to rest a drink on it without spilling it. The angle of the elbows, if you're looking like from a top view, should be like out about 45 degrees. So you don't want your arms coming straight out. So if you imagine you're looking from a top view, your body kind of wants to look like an arrow with your elbows coming out at 45-degree angle. You don't want them coming out looking like a T with your elbows like sticking out at 90 degrees. Um, but you don't want them tucked in too much either. So yeah, if you imagine looking from the top, you want your body to look like an arrow. If they're coming out too much, if they're like anybody's looking like a T, you're going to like have issues with shoulders and elbows because it's not a natural angle. Now, as you're lowering your chest to the ground, this is the next thing where people tend to go wrong. You need to actually lower in the same plank position. So you need to have that same um, kind of stiff board position of your body the whole way down. So throughout the whole movement, you don't want to be compromising this position. The only joint that is moving is your elbow. So you don't want to relax your glutes and let your hips come forward. You don't want to relax your core and let your belly sag in the middle. You don't want to be sticking your bum up in the air. So the hips are locked, the core is locked, everything is locked except your elbows. The elbows are the only joint that is moving. I also want to briefly mention the head position and neck position here because this is where I see um, quite a few people like kind of putting their neck at risk of injury by hanging it down too much, like it's almost like they're trying to face plant the ground. I think this is a subconscious thing that a lot of people do. They tend to think that if their face is getting closer to the ground, they must be doing the push-up correctly. So I have seen push-ups or push-up attempts where people are doing these like bending the elbows very slightly and then like trying to lower their face to the ground. Um, so yeah, make sure your neck is in a neutral position and you're looking, roughly half a meter to a meter on the ground in front of you. So you don't want to be craning your neck um, forward. And you don't want to be hanging your neck either. Nice neutral position because your neck is part of your spine. So if the rest of your body is in a nice straight position, it should need to also extend to your head. So the whole spine from the neck down is straight, or not straight, but like in natural alignment. No, nobody's spine is dead straight, but in natural alignment. So the key points of movement here is um, that you need to maintain that nice flat. Imagine your body is like a plank of wood. It's just pivoting on the toes, so it's just going up and down in that, holding that same position. So lock your core in as you're pushing yourself down. So that is the down position of the push-up. So from here, we're going to push yourself back up to the up position. And that's just simply a matter of straightening out your arms. So I say simply, the concept is simple, but as I said, not easy. This is the concentric part of the exercise. So if you think about um, the parts of the exercise. You've got the concentric where you're actually pushing the weight, and you've got the eccentric where you're lowering the weight. So as you lower into the down position of the push up, that is eccentric, pushing up into back into the start position is the concentric part. So if you can imagine doing a bench press, this is equivalent to pushing the weight, pushing the bar up. However, as I said, there's a lot more going on than simply pushing a weight with your chest and triceps. Because once again, you need to hold your body into that nice plank position throughout the whole movement. So don't drop your hips towards the ground. Don't stick your bum in the air. Don't let your midsection sag. So once again, we are in the start position or the high plank position. And if you've done this correctly, you've gone through the whole range of motion, keeping your body nice and flat with only your elbows moving. And you are now ready to start the next rep. So as I said, simple, but not easy. So I just want to go through a few common faults with the push-up. And as I keep mentioning, and this is probably the key thing, is keep holding that nice flat plank position throughout the whole range of motion, so the entire range of motion. So you don't want to at any point be letting yourself sag in the middle, dropping your hips forward or sticking your bum in the air. And that is quite difficult for a lot of people to get. So work on mastering that. Master that instead of trying to do quantity, work on quality. It's no point doing 100, half push-ups that aren't very good. With your bum sticking in there or you're sagging in the middle, you're better off doing 5 really good push-ups than 100 crap push-ups. So yeah, the holding up position is probably the number one issue that I have when I do watch people attempting push-ups. The second common fault I often see is people hanging their neck towards the ground. So as I said, this is often a subconscious thing. People think that if they get their face close to the ground, they've done a good push-up. So they kind of tend to hang their head and try to face plant the ground, but they're not actually really getting very low at all in the push-up itself. So nice neutral position of the neck. Remember, the neck is part of the spine. Keep it neutral. Third most common fault I see is people doing these too fast. So remember, like any weight exercise, time under tension is key. So essentially pausing at the top, pausing at the bottom, slowing them down. You want to do about 1 push-up every 2 to 3 seconds. Don't rip these out super fast. And chances are, if you're ripping them out super fast, your technique isn't real good either. You may not be going all the way up or all the way down. So slow these things down. Work on time under tension. You're better off doing 5 nice slow push-ups than 20 really fast push-ups. Slow them down, make them deliberate, just like any other weights exercise. Just like when you're doing a bench press, a squat, or anything, slow these things down. Don't like bounce up and down off the floor. For some common fault I often see is people not going down low enough. So remember your upper arms need to be parallel with the ground. Um, don't be doing these half push-ups, and that kind of goes hand in hand a bit with the head hanging thing, I think, because people tend to like bend their elbows a little bit lower the chest slightly, at a very small angle, and then try to do the rest by lowering their head towards the ground instead of going all the way up with their all the way down with their chest with their upper arms parallel to the ground. So make sure nice strict form, get those um, arms parallel, upper arms parallel with the ground. There may be some people out there that have like larger chests um, that have difficulty getting themselves low enough because their chest hits the ground um, bit before they reach that upper arms in parallel. If you are one of those people, there's a couple of things you can do. You get things called push-up bars where they just elevate your hands a bit slightly, or you can, get a couple of blocks or something to elevate your hands a bit slightly so you can get your chest to the correct position. But they're not necessary if you're, like most people that actually can get to that position without their chest hitting the ground. You don't need these things, but if you're one of those people that your chest is on the ground and you still haven't got into the correct down position, then elevate your hands a bit using a couple of blocks or a set of these push-up bars. And just talking about the push-up bars while I'm at it, they can also be useful if you have wrist issues and have trouble getting that hand flat because there's too much pressure on your wrist. You can actually use these push-up bars to keep your wrist nice and straight to avoid the strength on your wrist if you do have wrist issues. Doing push-ups on your knuckles instead of your palms can also help there too. And the fifth common fault I see is not going up all the way. So fourth fault is not coming down far enough. Fifth fault not coming up all the way. They kind of go up to half, and it's kind of like the half rep thing. Um, People often, you know, either consciously or subconsciously do half reps because it's actually easier. So make sure full range of motion all the way down to your upper arms parallel with the ground and all the way up until your arms are straight. So how to avoid these faults? So it's actually good to maybe get someone watching you that knows how to do a correct push-up. Because sometimes you don't know that you're doing these things until someone points it out. Our bodies are very good at finding the path of least resistance and convincing us into thinking we're doing it correctly. And the push-up is one of those exercises that your body does tend to try to fool you into thinking you're doing correctly. So get someone to watch your setup or film yourself maybe or look at yourself in the mirror. Make sure you've got that nice straight line between your shoulders, your heels. Clench your butt cheeks. I don't think people often say this enough. Clench your butt cheeks. That's going to stop your hips dropping forward. That's going to lock your hips in position and hold them clenched throughout the whole range of motion. Engage your core. So make sure, imagine if someone is going to punch you in the stomach, they're going to, so you're holding that core in, you're really like engaging the core to try to turn your core into a brick wall. That is going to stop your midsection sagging in the middle. And as I said, pick a point about between half a meter or a meter in front of you, um, and focus on that point. That's going to stop your head sagging and stop your neck from being in that awkward neck position. So that's the setup. Now with the execution. As you're lowering yourself, ensure that you're holding this position. Your glutes are still clenched. Your core is still engaged. And you've still got that nice flat position. Ensure that the pivot point is your toes, not your hips. Um, so the only pivot point should be your toes. There shouldn't be a pivot in your hips or your knees. It's just on your toes. Your toes are that pivot point. Lower lower yourself to the point where your upper arms are parallel to the ground. So you have a nice straight flat line between from elbow to elbow, including across your back. And use the mirror or your spotter to make sure you have achieved this. Pause briefly at the bottom so they're not bouncing up and down using momentum, you're using strength. Pause briefly before straightening the elbows and pushing yourself back up all the way. Once again, ensuring that you hold your body in that nice flat position. Your glutes are still clenched. Your core is still engaged. Pause briefly at the top before you once again do the whole thing again for your next rep. Remember, slow these down, do these deliberate. Remember, 5 good push-ups is way better than 20, 40, 50 bad push-ups. Now, finally, before I end this episode, I'm going to talk about a few push-up variations out there, and there's tons of push-up variations. Some are good, some are not good. I just wanted to cover a few of them. And look, before I go on, I want to say that push-up is a solid exercise in itself. So when you're thinking about variations, what you want to factor in is the variation worth it? Is whatever fancy push-up variation that you're going to do either going to sacrifice the number you can do or sacrifice your technique in some way, which kind of negates the more difficult level of the variation. So for most people, the standard push-up is enough. In fact, I don't usually train people with other variations of push-ups for two reasons. Um, Firstly, because um, the standard push-up done correctly is a challenging enough exercise in itself for most people. And secondly, quite often uh, a variation will sacrifice good technique. So people might be able to, do one particular variation, but it's really sacrificing good form or technique, or sacrificing number of reps, or even making it dangerous. So yeah, I don't actually, I really don't um, add any other variation with a couple of minor exceptions. I'll talk about them shortly. The first one I'm going to talk about is, I guess it's like the elephant in the room. I often get asked this, if they can do this variation, is the knee push-up. Um, some people used to be called the girl push-up. Some people still call them girl push-ups, but it's the one where you actually, instead of on your toes, you're on your knees. I've often said I'm not a big fan of this. It can be used as a progression to a standard push-up, if done correctly, but most of the time it's not done correctly. So the theory of the knee push-up is everything is the same except for one thing. Instead of the pivot point being your toe, it is your knee. So you're effectively shortening the length of your body, um, because you're not holding yourself in the plank position. There's um, very little core activity happening there. And yeah, So, and you're probably reducing the weight of your body as well because you only go from the knees up instead of from the toes up. So you're slightly reducing the weight of your body. But the main thing is the because of the shortened length of your body, um, there's you're not having to hold your hips into the air in position. So glutes and core, there's minimal activation. Um, the issue I have with this is most people don't do this correctly. So they'll get into position to do this, but they have, instead of having a nice flat position between the knee and the shoulder, they have they've got their bum sticking in the air, and they're doing this kind of thing where they're hinging at the hips instead of the knee. So the first issue I have with that is most people don't do this correctly. The second issue is most people don't progress to a standard push-up from here. So if people were doing this correctly, correct technique, as I said, most people don't, with the intention to progress to a standard push-up, this could be a useful tool. But as I said, it's usually done incorrectly, and usually I would say like I could probably count on like two hands the number of times I've seen this done correctly, and most people don't progress if they start doing these push-ups. They just continue to do them um, instead of having the intention to progress to a standard push-up. And look, the third issue I have is there is very little core activation and glute activation. So progressing from there to then just doing the standard push-up where suddenly your core is having to work a lot more, and your glutes are having to work to maintain that position. It's kind of it's like comparing um, apples with oranges, or maybe not apples with oranges, but maybe like red apples with green apples. Yeah, so with that on your knees position, you're not really training yourself to hold that nice flat position. So a couple of alternates that I've got to the traditional knee push up is it's kind of like a, I guess it's compromise between the knee and the standard push up. So give this a go. Start in the high plank position. Hold that position. Lower yourself until you are in the down push-up position with your upper arms parallel with the ground, and only then and only then lower your knees to the ground and push yourself up into the up position, ensuring all you've done is changing the 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 point of pivot. I'm trying to remember that from back in school, the name for that pivot point. I think it may be the fulcrum, maybe. But that point, the hinge point. So you train only when you're in the push-up down position, then you lower your knees to the ground, but keep that body nice and flat, and push yourself back into up position. Once you're back in the up position, lift the knees up and go back into the high plank position and do it all again. So doing it this way, you're actually training that core, training those glutes, training to hold yourself in that position. And before long, you will be doing the whole range of motion on your toes instead of on your knees. So this is a much better like progression alternative than doing them on your knees to start with. Just a little tip there if you are doing them on your knees. If you are doing them on your knees, to ensure that you're holding that flat position, raise your toes off the ground. most people will still have their toes on the ground while their knees on the ground. So all they're doing is doing like a, like a on all fours position instead of like changing that pivot point. So if your toes are also on the ground as well as your knees, then your bum will be sticking in the air and your positioning will be incorrect. So just a little tip there if you are doing them on your knees. But as I said, that is my less. I'm not a big fan, but if you're giving it a go and like doing as I said, that compromise half and half, lowering yourself, doing the eccentric phase from your toes, then dropping to your knees and pushing back up again, you'll find yourself being able to progress to a standard push-up. The other option to the standard push-up to if you want an easier version, and once again with the intention of progressing to a standard push-up, is the elevated push-up, and that is when your upper body is higher than your toes. So your hands are higher than your toes. Therefore, you have less weight, less distance um, to travel. So in my opinion, this is the better option than the knee push-up, but you still need to factor in body positioning. Make sure you've still got that nice straight line. And I know I keep harping on about that, but that is the most common fault when people can't do a push-up is holding that nice straight line between the shoulders and the heels. So once again, um, the only difference here is your hands are higher than your toes, and the higher you are, the higher your hands are, uh, the easier the push-up gets because you have less weight and less distance to travel. So as you progress and get better at this, you gradually get lower and lower. So you find yourself a nice sturdy, make sure it's sturdy platform to put your upper body on, and you're still going down to your chest hits the platform, whatever you're pressing off, and then pushing back up again, ensuring you're holding that nice flat position. A couple of common mistakes people make with this one is, firstly, as I said, and as I keep saying, holding that nice flat position. But secondly, people quite often have their hands too far forward when they do this. So make sure your hands are level with your chest when you're doing this. As you get better at this, progress to lower and lower until you eventually do it on the ground, ensuring before you progress your technique is correct at each stage. So don't progress until you've nailed that correct technique. So there are two variations um, to make push-ups easier. So you've got the knee push-up and the elevated push-up. Now I want to talk about um, variations where people make it more difficult or perceive to make it more difficult. And I've often talked about party trick exercises in my podcast, and they're the ones that people do because they think it makes them look good, think it makes them look stronger, more athletic. But the reality is it's kind of not really doing anything. So the first push-up variation I want to put into the party trick category is the one-handed push-up. And this one kind of like, I have mixed feelings about this because I am a big fan of the Rocky movies. And this one was obviously made popular by the Rocky movies, but it is seriously not a good variation. It's just a party trick variation. And people often say, oh, can you do one-handed push-ups? You'll be doing push-ups and people go, oh, but can you do one-handed push-ups? Um, One-handed push-ups, where do I start? Firstly, let's talk about the risk of danger here. So the position is all wrong, lowering yourself with your shoulder at an awkward angle. Um, it's almost impossible to get to um, down low enough for this to be effective at all. And, if you do, you run the risk of face planting anyway. Um, and the reality is, if you can do 20 good push-ups, you might be able to do one or two one-handed push-ups. What benefit is that going to do? So the risk um, really outweighs the benefit here, just to show off to someone and say, hey, look what I can do. Secondly, the setup for most people when they do this right from the start is wrong. So you look at most people when they're doing one-handed push-ups and their bum's sticking in air. If they can't hold the nice flat position, then that is not a correct push-up. So most people that will attempt a one-handed push-up, they're going to have their bum sticking in the air because they're trying to stabilize themselves. So they've missed the whole first concept of doing a push-up. The second variation I want to talk about is a push-up in a burpee. Now this is going to be controversial. I'm probably going to get some comments about this, but a push-up does not belong in a burpee for a couple of reasons. So let's talk about the history of the burpee. Some dude that worked for the YMCA back in 1930s by the name of Dr. Royal Burpee designed the 4-point jump squat, which was intended as a fitness test. And if you're interested, um, last year I did an episode on the history of the burpee, so check that one out. So yeah, firstly, it's historically not correct. Um, the original burpee did not contain a push-up, but the main issue I have with this is it kind of negates the value of the push-up by adding it to a burpee, because most people, because they're trying to rip these out as fast as they can, will do not very good push-ups at all in these burpees. So they'll do the burpee and then do some half kind of push-up with their bum sticking in there. They won't be slowing it down using time under tension because they're trying to get as many of these things done as possible. So yeah, do your push-ups as a standalone. You're not going to get the value out of a push-up in a burpee with push-up. Do your push-up separately. Now, the third one I want to talk about, and this, I'm not going to call this one a party trick, because it could have some value if done correctly, um, but it's kind of, I don't see the point in these, and they're what's called diamond push-ups or tricep push-ups, where you have your your hands closer together and your elbows are tucked in more, so it focuses more on your triceps rather than your chest. So it still uses your chest, but it engages triceps more. So the first issue I have with this is most of the time, once again, it's not done correctly. People actually don't lower themselves far enough because they're compensating for you've got less balance there, because your hands are close together. So because of that, people often, whether it's subconscious or consciously, don't lower themselves as far as they would with a standard push-up, um, and and quite often don't go through the complete range of motion, so don't raise themselves up to the top position either. So look, I'm not going to put this one in the party trick category because it can be effective, but from my way of thinking, your triceps are going to be engaged doing a standard push-up anyway. Um, it's yeah, it's not. I don't see it as relevant. So if done correctly, yes, it can be engaging your triceps more if you really want to develop your triceps more. But your triceps get a lot of work with your standard push-up. Um, so it's one that I don't do myself. I don't see it as being relevant, but I'm not going to put it in the party trick um, category because it can be effective as long as it's done correctly, as long as you're lowering yourself down low enough. Often people do this as a way of kind of a smoke and mirrors thing. Um, so they'll be trying to do an exercise that looks more complicated, doing a variation that looks more complicated um, to to cover up for their lack of technique. This may again be a subconscious thing, but quite often people will do these ones or do them fast because they're kind of trying to show off a little bit, but their technique is failing. But one variation I do want to talk about that I use sometimes from time to time and and coach some people do is the hand release push up. And this can be really effective if done correctly for getting the core strength up there required for to do good push ups. So the hand release push up um, involves lowering yourself from you starting in the up position, lowering yourself to the ground, all the way to the ground until your chest is on the ground. And then from there, you release your hands and put your hands back on the ground and push yourself all the way to the top again. Now, in theory, this sounds easy. In practice, a lot of people can't do this and or can't do this correctly because the difficulty here is keeping your body in a nice flat position. So as you come to the ground, you should be touching your ground in a flat position, not like sagging forward and letting your groin hit the ground first, but actually coming down in that nice flat plank. Then when you go to push yourself back up to the top, you need to come up as a plank, not like as a bit of sticky tape that you're peeling off the ground. So most people, when they attempt this for the first time, will like peel themselves up from the chest first, and then the groin is the last part of their body to hit the ground. But everything needs to come up in unison. So this really takes a lot of core engagement and glute engagement to keep those hips locked in, to stop those hips from sagging forward, lock the core in to stop to stop your midsection from sagging. And before you lift yourself back up into that up position, you need to have your entire body locked in so that you come up as that plank, so everything comes up together. And this is a lot more difficult than it sounds. Give it a go, um, because it is a variation that I actually quite use myself personally and get others to do as well. Um, yeah, so that's probably about the only variation I use. Um, the hand release ones, and you don't really need to release your hands as long as you're on the ground. I just call them hand release push-ups because I like to lift my hands up to make sure I'm all the way on the ground. But you don't need to as long as you're flat on the ground. Yeah. So look, I guess if you're thinking about variations, firstly you need to ask yourself why. What benefit is this variation to me? Is it is it going to be of any more benefit than doing good, strict, standard push-ups? Ask yourself, is this a party trick? Am I just doing this to show off? And also the risk to reward factor. Are there extra risks involved? Are there any extra risks involved and are the risks worth the extra benefits I would get from this? And as I said, for most people, the majority of people, doing a standard push-up is challenging enough. You can, if you find it's starting to get too easy, you can add more pauses, slow it down, maybe pause for 5 seconds at the bottom to make this more difficult, rather than trying to do fancy versions of the standard push-up. And look, before I go, I'm well aware that I'm nearly at the hour mark. Who'd have thought that I could talk about push-ups for a whole hour? But here I am, nearly at an hour, and I'm well aware that if I go over an hour, uploading the podcast seems to be a bit more difficult. So I'll try to get this in under an hour. But the last thing I will talk about is push-ups on your knuckles. Is this a party trick, or is this a legit, not variation, but is this good? And as I said before, if you have a wrist injury or a wrist, if you have issues getting your wrist kind of in that flat position, to have your hands down on the ground, the push-ups on your fist could be a good variation of that, because you don't want to be not being able to do a push-up because you can't get your wrist into the right position to have it flat. So there's a benefit there. Other benefits, so you see like martial artists and boxers do this variation a bit. That's because they train to have, when they're throwing a punch, they need their wrist straight. So it kind of helps with that wrist strength a bit as well. So as a boxing coach myself, one of the things I try to get people in the habit of, because it's not good if you do this incorrectly, is having a nice straight wrist when you connect with your punch. So it doesn't matter what punch you do, whether it's a straight punch, a hook, or an uppercut. You want a nice straight wrist. You don't want your wrist like kink forward or kink back, because you will injure your wrist. So doing this variation might be beneficial to wrist strength, to being able to hold your wrist nice and straight. So yes, it's not a party trick. I mean, no, it's not a party trick. It definitely has benefits. If you don't like doing it that way, that's fine. If you can get your hand nice and flat into that nice flat position to do standard push-ups, that's fine. But yeah, it's not something people are showing off to do by doing. If you see them doing it on their fist, maybe they do have a wrist injury, or maybe they're trying to strengthen their wrist because they're a martial artist or a boxer, or maybe they just like doing it that way. So anyway, guys, that's it. I'm like I have 2 minutes to go to the hour, so I need to wrap this up before the 1 hour mark. So thank you again for listening to this episode, guys. I hope you got something out of it. Feel free to contact me, kiltmanfitness@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook or Instagram at the Kilted Athlete Podcast, or leave a message in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast so you get notifications, and I'll get notifications that I have another subscriber. Thanks again, guys. Talk to you next time. Bye.